I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master has very kindly come, forced open my eyes with the torchlight of transcendental knowledge. I offer my most respectful obeisances unto him. By the grace of the spiritual master, even a layman can cross over mountains, a blind man can see stars in the sky, and a dumb man can recite eloquent Vedic poetry. So scholars have often reflected on the fact that Caitanya Mahaprabhu's movement not only took hold and flourished, but that spread all over India and all over the world and all over the universe. In light of the fact that Caitanya Mahaprabhu himself did not leave a will, he did not have an organization, and he didn't write very much. In fact, even the Shikshastakam prayers, which we recite every morning, it's said that Mahaprabhu spoke those. And they were actually written down by his secretary, Swarup Damodar. And of all of the unlimited transcendental knowledge that Mahaprabhu spoke, these 8 prayers were considered by his secretary, Swarup Damodar, to be the most significant. And for that reason, they have been included in the literatures of the Goswamis. And right at the very end of this Caitanya Caritamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he recites them. So very, very wonderful. But Mahaprabhu, of course, did speak so much transcendental wisdom to his intimate associates, and we will read one wonderful conversation after another as we progress through the Caitanya Caritamrita. Wonderful discourses to Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, and his wonderful conversation, very famous Roy Ramananda Sambad conversation with Ramananda Roy. And he explained the famous Atmarama verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam in not less than 61 different meanings to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And so many other exalted personalities. Raghunath Das Goswami, who lived with the Lord in Puri for many years. He is known as the Swarupera Raghunath, or the Raghunath of Swarup Damodar Goswami, because Mahaprabhu handed him over to Swarup Damodar, who was his instructing spiritual master. But nonetheless, Mahaprabhu directly instructed Raghunath Das Goswami, don't dress very flamboyantly and don't eat very opulently, because Raghunath Das was a renunciant, even though he was a prince destined to inherit fabulous wealth. His father and uncle, Hiranya and Govardhan Majubana, were fabulously wealthy landholders, and Raghunath was the only son of the family. But he ran away from home, despite the endeavours of his parents to keep him at home. Mother complained to her husband, the father, we've tried everything to keep our boy here, but he has become a madman of this Chaitanya Chandra. Yes. So many wonderful, so much deep, profound philosophy is there. And at the Oxford Centre for Vaishnava and Hindu Studies, the personality most studied is Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Of all the great saints of India, all the great sampradayas, and going back practically since time immemorial, but in more recent times, Lord Buddha, Sripad Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhvaracharya. But Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu is the personality most studied, most influential personality. And Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami has wonderfully described and given so many poetic comparisons, like the sun and moon both rise in the east and then gradually pass westward. So in the same way, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu appeared in what is modern-day West Bengal, but their movement has spread all over the world. And there's a beautiful verse, Vande Sri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gaudadaya Pushpapanto Chitro Sandhu Tamondo. Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami offers his respectful obeisances unto Sri Krishna Chaitanya and Prabhu Nityananda. They are just like the sun and the moon, who have arisen simultaneously on the horizon of Gaudadesh, to dissipate the darkness of ignorance and thus wonderfully bestow benediction upon all. So this is the mercy of His Lordship, Lord Gaurasunda and Lord Nityananda Prabhu. And some of us, many of us who have had the good fortune to be in Mayapur on Gaur Purnima Day, the sacred appearance day of Lord Chaitanya, I'm sure we have the fondest of memories. Sometimes trying to escape the literally hundreds and thousands of pious pilgrims who flood the grounds and the temple of the Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir on that auspicious day, and for many days either side, coming from all over Bengal and further. So it's not uncommon for devotees to take shelter up on the rooftops, and you look down and see this absolutely wonderful scene. I don't think electric is I'm trying to think of a better description, but the atmosphere is definitely electrified, and simultaneously with so much devotion and piety. And simultaneously at that auspicious time in the evening, one can see the sun still there setting, and the moon rising at the same time. And it's the most beautiful transcendental atmosphere. So this is, of course, the kindness in the age of Kali, described as the iron age of quarrel and hypocrisy. But spiritual life for those who are serious and sincere is made very, very accessible by the kindness, the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So, and things which are very pure are always very attractive. Pure milk, pure ghee, pure gold. When Prabhupada visited New Vrindavan for the first time in 1969, his pioneering disciples there were offering Srila Prabhupada piping hot sweetened milk every evening. And Prabhupada commented, "I have not tasted milk like this in 50 years." Because everyone knows in India, the milk vendors, they water down the milk. Not only that, but they add other things to the milk. They add powdered milk or buffalo milk. So for this reason, Prabhupada said, "I have not tasted milk like this," because it was pure. Pure milk. It was one of the first things the pioneering devotees did when they purchased the first acreage at New Vrindavan, was to purchase some cows with their calves that were milking. So Mahaprabhu's movement is very attractive, very, very pure, and of course we have all been fortunate to take shelter and to have gratitude. Gratitude is very important, not to forget where we once were and where we are now, to have a grateful heart, grateful to Krishna and his representatives, our gurus and the Vaishnavas in this world. So, and of course, since the time of Mahaprabhu, this tradition has been passed passed on down. And Mahaprabhu did empower so many of his early followers, Rupa and Sanatan and others, followed them to Vrindavan and excavated the lost holy places. Of course, that excavation had actually started 1 or 2 generations before, as we were mentioning recently. Some of the earlier devotees, Ishwarapuri and Madhavendrapuri especially, rediscovered the famous Gopal deity at Govardhan and installed him in a new temple, reinstalled him, spent 2 years there at that time. So excavation was underway already by the time Rupa and Sanatan arrived in Vrindavan, and we're having a really tough time not saying something about Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada. Even though we know his disappearance is coming up, but it's still about a week away, so I think we can be forgiven. And I'm sure Garuda Prabhu is doing wonderful research, as he always does, and will give a wonderful class, because Rupa Goswami's disappearance day is considered extremely important to all the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And we did hear one nice pastime, which perhaps which we never heard before. So it's always nice to hear new things. So we, unbeknownst to us until recently, Srila Rupa Goswami and his older brother Sanatan, there were letters going backwards and forwards between Mahaprabhu and these 2 great personalities. From Puri, Mahaprabhu was writing, and Rupa and Sanatan were sending letters back. There were always persons, pilgrims coming and going between the different holy places. So somehow or other letters were coming and going. And on one occasion, Mahaprabhu instructed Rupa Goswami, who he knew still had some wealth in his possession from his former occupation as one of the chief ministers of Nawab Hussain Shah, the king of Bengal. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed him to purchase 500 cows and to maintain that herd of cows very nicely, and to ensure that the milk from those cows would go to feeding all of the saintly persons living in Braja at that time. See the mercy, the compassion of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So it was a wonderful instruction. Of course, that was on top of the other instructions Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had already given Rupa and Sanatan to excavate the lost holy places, to write books on the science of bhakti, to install deities, create wonderful temples. So this was added to the list. And of course Rupa Goswami did that very nicely. So, and of course the Goswamis had vision for the future. Rupa and Sanatan and their nephew Jiva especially, it said, they conceived of a worldwide confederation of temples of Krishna with devotees. And they referred to it as the Vishva Vaishnav Raja Sabha, which for those of our younger devotees may not be familiar with these terms. Vishva, just as Lord Chaitanya is known as Vishvambara, he's able to deliver the entire universe. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vaishnav, devotees, and Raja Sabha, a great building, many great buildings, kingly houses of devotees. So this was their vision for the future, that there would the Krishna consciousness would not just remain within the subcontinent, very unique and pious land of Bharatvarsha, but it would in fact spread. And these, of course, many of the wonderful direct instructions we're receiving here directly from Caitanya Mahaprabhu himself. Therefore, I order every man and woman within this universe to accept this Krishna consciousness movement and distribute it everywhere. Prabhupada was speaking very strongly on many occasions in big pandal programs in India, major cities during the 70s. And on one occasion in Bombay, there was an enormous crowd, 5, 10, 15,000 people. And Prabhupada was sitting on the stage lecturing very strongly. And he had approximately 20 of his young Western disciples sitting up there with him. And Prabhupada was lamenting the fallen state of India. That just see how fallen the land of Krishna and Ramachandra has become so fallen. It's such a lamentable condition that we are having to import milk powder and brahmanas from the West. And the devotees sitting on the stage recall seeing many heads in the audience, the pious Indians, their heads went down. And because they agreed and they could understand. This is very unfortunate. Prabhupada had gone to America to make devotees of Krishna and brought them back to reinforce amongst the Indian population, don't give up this wonderful, sublime spiritual culture, which is yours. This is India's great gift to the world. So, of course, some of us join the Krishna consciousness movement for different reasons. Krishna does say in the Bhagavad Gita, I am adventure. And Korma Prabhu titled his wonderful book, History of Prabhupada's 5 visits to Australia and 3 visits to New Zealand, a great transcendental adventure, because that was Prabhupada's term for sharing our good fortune with others, giving Krishna consciousness to others who are bereft of it. A great transcendental adventure. And of course, we all know so many wonderful adventures we've all had in Krishna consciousness. I was checking in with His Holiness Indraduna Maharaj, called Maharaj a little while back and asked how he was doing, and he said, I'm just living on memories. And what memories Maharaj has, and what memories we all have in these unprecedented times. But yeah, life full of adventure. I have a quote, I can't remember off the top of my head, so I better check in with Sri Shloka book. It goes something like this. But a quiet life of lonely desperation. That's what we don't want, right? So, sorry? What was that? Yes. Groping in the darkness for something we have lost. So that's what we don't want. Yes, so, and such a thrill it is to share Krishna consciousness with others and to experience, the transcendental pleasure of seeing people take to this wonderful lifestyle. As exemplified by Caitanya Mahaprabhu himself, who walked all over India for 6 years, inaugurating his Harinam Sankirtan movement. So, and while we're still discussing Rupa Goswami, we'll mention some of his famous verses, which are there, which we can all take spiritual strength from. Bhakti Asana Savo Parivini Muktam Tat Paratena Nirmalam Hrishikena Hrishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Uchate. That there are 2 wonderful byproducts which come from rendering service to Krishna. And one is that one becomes free of all the temporary false bodily designations. And the other is the senses become purified. So people are stumbling in ignorance, misidentifying themselves as a physical body with a subtle mind and an ego and some intelligence. A long time since I was at school, but is the gross physical body made up of 70% water? Ram-Prashan, thank you, educator. So if we think about that, I don't think any respectable person who considers themselves a little aristocratic or cultured would be happy to think, I'm a water bag. That's not very dignified, no. And of course we're not. We're much more than 70% water. What to speak of our mind, which is preoccupied with sankalpa and vikalpa, accepting and rejecting constantly. I like this, I don't like that. Attraction and repulsion. And then kicking it upstairs, as they say, to the intelligence to figure out how to get the desirable objects and how to avoid the undesirable. So these are all very much coverings of the pure spirit soul. And it's Prabhupada's kindness upon us that at every opportunity in his purports and his classes, he reinforces and reminds us that we're not these gross and subtle bodies. So, and of course, that's our gratitude. And I think we have here somewhere else. Of course, Rupa Goswami's accepting that order from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very wonderful and very instructive also, to procure 500 cows and then to maintain them very nicely and to feed all the saintly persons with cow's milk in Vrindavan. Anashaktasya vishayan yataham upayunjataha nirbandha Krishna samvande yuktam vairagyamuchate. Another famous verse of Srila Rupa Goswami, that nothing so-called material should be rejected. The highest form of renunciation is to accept everything favourable for devotional service. Everything is Krishna's energy and can be dovetailed in his service. This is actually the highest form of renunciation. So Rupa Goswami, of course, utilised some of that gold which he had kept. Even after he'd satisfied all his family members, ensured that his nephew Jiva would get a thorough education, and that Jiva's mother, after Rupa and Sanatan's brother Anupam, also known as Vallabha, passed away untimely, that they would be taken care of, and other family members and Brahmins and Vaishnavas. But still, he kept some in reserve. And it's really interesting also that even before meeting Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Rupa Goswami was writing to him along with Sanatan and expressing, they hadn't even met, but Rupa was expressing, how are we going to survive in separation from you? Really profound realizations. These wonderful stories and histories are there, which we get to relish in practicing bhakti yoga. And of course Rupa Goswami is very famous for instructing the world, if you at all want to enjoy society, friendship and love, then whatever you do, don't look at the smiling face of Lord Govinda, because his beauty is so captivating that it will be impossible for you to go back and enjoy the so-called happiness of this realm. Society, friendship and love divinely bestowed upon man was was the English poet Cowper, which Prabhupada was familiar with and would sometimes quote, because these are the great opulences which most materialistic people want: to be well liked and respected in society, to have a nice family situation, to be loved by others. This is what materialistic people are very anxious for. But Krishna is known as Chittahari, one who steals away the consciousness or the mind. Manohara, his mind enchanting. So, of course, we feel very fortunate if somehow or other we've become attracted to him and his devotional service and his devotees. So, we might just swing across momentarily to the Ramanuja, telling a story which we've really wanted to tell for some time, but we've always run out of time. So I'm going to tell it today. I think we've got time, because it's very instructive. And we know Mahaprabhu personally went to South India on the ruse of seeking out, finding his older brother, Vishvarupa. Sorry. Lordship.
He was Vishvarupa and Vishvarupa.
Okay, but Vishvarupa is one name, right? Yeah, older brother, Vishvarupa.
He has a birth name and his name.
Okay. Can I call him Vishvarupa? Birth name, right? Yeah. So, but Mahaprabhu, being the omniscient Supreme Lord, already knew that his older brother had passed away. But he used that as an excuse to go to South India to deliver all the fallen souls of southern India. And of course, famously, he stayed at the house of Venkatabhatta for 4 months during the rainy season, delivered his whole family, the 3 brothers, Trimala Bhatt and the great Prabodhananda Saraswati, and Venkatabhatta's son, Gopal, at the time became the great Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So they were, of course, members of the Ramanuja Sampradaya, or the Sri Sampradaya, Lakshmi Sampradaya. And, of course, some centuries before, the great Ramanuja Acharya became the most prominent Acharya in that line. And there's a wonderful pastime. Ramanuja Acharya had many, many disciples, men and ladies, very devoted to him. One of his foremost disciples was a great scholar and very famous in South India. His name was Dasarati. And one day, Dasarati and his Guru Maharaj, Ramanuja Acharya, were discussing Bhagavad Gita. And Dasarati had just asked his Gurudev for his deep understanding of the famous verse, Sarvadharmam Parityagya. Krishna's instruction to Arjuna, just give up all other forms of religiosity, surrender unto me, I can deliver you from all sinful reaction, do not. So at that time, another disciple came into the room. Her name was Adi-lila. And she was very upset. She was very distressed. Her situation had changed dramatically in recent months. She'd gotten married. And though she loved her husband, who was a very nice devotee, his parents were not nice people. And her husband was away from home most of the time, earning wealth. They were poor, so he was the sole provider. So he was away from the house practically all of the time, earning wealth to support his elderly parents and his new wife. And Adi-lila was not very strong. She was physically not a very strong lady. And her in-laws were forcing her to do all of the housework, all of the cooking, cleaning, fetching water, in buckets from 1 mile away. So she was very upset, and they were abusing her. They were abusive people. So she was very upset. So she'd come from some distance to her Guru Maharaj asking what she should do, how to deal with this situation. So Ramanujacharya, he considered for some moments, and then he said to Dasarati, you go with her. You do all the cooking, cleaning, fetching water, shopping, until I tell you to come back. Dasarati's sitting there still waiting for an explanation of Sarvadharman Parityagya. And off he goes. And he offered obeisances with his god sister, and without a word he left. And he went to her village quite some distance away. They walked there. And the in-laws were overjoyed. All of a sudden they've got this strong young man who was a very good cook. And he's doing all the cooking, cleaning, fetching water and shopping for almost 1 year. And his god sister, Adi-lila, she protested. She said, look, let me do some of the cooking, let me do some of the cleaning at least. And he said, no, Guru Maharaj has said I am to do everything. So she just worshipped her deities of Lakshmi Narayan and studied Puranas and Shastra. And one day, Dasarati was in the village on market day doing the weekly shopping. And he noticed, after he'd done the shopping, he noticed there was a crowd sitting down and patiently listening to what appeared like one Vaishnava sadhu giving a discourse on the Shastras. So he sat down and he listened. But he quickly detected that this so-called Vaishnava sadhu was heavily infested with Mayavad philosophy. So his explanations were distorted. So at the end of his discourse, he very humbly stood up and said, don't mind, sir, but some of your presentation is incorrect. So this sadhu was, of course, proud, and who are you? And Dasarati was dressed in his kitchen attire. And any of us who served our apprenticeships washing pots in an ISKCON kitchen know kitchen attire means you're covered from head to toe in pot black. And if you're a cook, there's wonderful yellow stains everywhere from turmeric. So this is how he was dressed. So this so-called sadhu protested, you look like a cook or a kitchen hand. But Dasarati said, notwithstanding that, and he pointed out all the defects in the, this was not pure Siddhanta, pure Vaishnava Tattva, because he was a great scholar. He knew the Shastras. And some people in the crowd started to whisper amongst themselves, I think that's Dasarati. I think that's Ramanuja's very famous scholarly devotee. What's he doing here? Dressed in kitchen cleaning clothes. So ultimately the so-called Pandit who'd given the discourse, the verbose dissertation on the Shastras, he became a little humble, and he actually was he actually came to his senses and realized that Dasarati was such a scholar and such a Vaishnava, and he surrendered to him and accepted his guidance. And some of the people in the crowd from the village, they came up and said, what are you doing here? Are you Dasarati? And he humbly admitted that he was. They said, what are you doing here? And he said, well, Guru Maharaj sent me here. So they said, well, we're going to your Guru Maharaj, and we're going to tell him that he has to now deliver you from this situation. You're living with these very nasty people, doing all the housework. So off they went to Sri Rangam, and they walked all the way, and they met Sripad Ramanujacharya, and they said, this is not proper. So Ramanujacharya, he actually came. He walked with them back to the village, and as soon as he saw his very dear disciple Dasarati, who was offering obeisance. He picked him up, gave him a big hug, and said, "Now," and then he said, "Now do you understand the meaning of Sarvadharmam Parityagya?" And Dasarati said, "Yes, Guru Maharaj, yes." So we better stop there. If anyone has any questions or comments, Ajita Prabhu, is there a Sri microphone? Yeah.
In verse 34.
Yes.
In relation to verse 34, I often and understood that Prabhupada says we should always preach according to time, place, and circumstance, especially in the fourth canto, because the Shabbat. And in this particular report, he says you should spread this without considering time, place, and circumstance. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this indicates that all classes of devotees should combine to distribute the Hare Krishna Mahamantra without consideration of the time, place, or situation. That's a tough question. I'm sure you know the answer, but and I have my. I'm going to let my dear seniors sitting on the bench out there, Ram Prasad and Bhagavata Sraya, have a think about this, and maybe they can add something. Well, in the sense that without consideration of time, place, and situation. Good question. Hare Krishna. Bhagavad, you have some thoughts while I'm trying to think. Microphone can come out. Bhagavat's right there.
Well, there's two things here. There's without consideration of time, place, and circumstance, and then the other side of it is according to the time, place, and circumstance. In terms of not considering the time, place, and circumstance, the analogy is there in the story Prabhupada tells about the dancer who he got an opportunity to dance somewhere. So he went, and when he came back, the people in his village said, "So how did it go?" He said, "Well, I didn't dance, there was a hill." And the point there is that if you're a professional, whatever the circumstances, you find a way. So that's not considering the circumstance. And then according to time, place, and circumstance, that's the way. You find that way of doing it. So without consideration of time, place, and circumstances, that we shouldn't become discouraged by difficulties, because there will be difficulties regardless. Prabhupada, Sri Kitty tells a story about sometime in 76, I think it was, Prabhupada was not well, and he'd been invited to go and do a preaching program which involved 7 hours of travel to be there for 3. And he wasn't well, so he was asking his immediate disciples, "What should I do? What should I do?" And they were having a back and forth about it. So I said, "Well, we'll leave it now, we'll decide later." Then after a little while, he rang his bell for Sri Kitty to come in, and he said to Sri Kitty, "So what do you think I should do?" And Sri Kitty said to Srila Prabhupada, "Well, Srila Prabhupada, it's a lot of travel for just, 7 hours travel for just 3 hours of being there, and you're not very well. That would be very inconvenient for you." And Prabhupada just laughed at him and said, "Preaching means inconvenience." So we shouldn't be without consideration of the inconveniences of the time, place, and circumstance. We have to find a way of doing something.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything else? Any other comments or questions? Is that all right, Ajita Ji? Okay.
Do you think that verse, Salvador,
refers to everyone, or is it for some?
Well, it first refers to everyone, but again, Srila Prabhupada gave instructions he gave certain instructions to certain disciples according to their situation, and he gave other instructions to other disciples depending on their situations. So there is what is the term? Yeah, there's that, but it's not exactly the one I'm thinking of, but I just can't find it at the moment. But just like, our devotees who are determined to preach are finding ways, even in the world situation now, to continue doing their preaching in very novel ways, and similarly here. So it is important. The mercy of Mahaprabhu is such that Krishna did demand surrender 5,000 years ago, but Caitanya Mahaprabhu, he doesn't demand surrender. He says, just take Krishna, irregardless of one's situation. You just take the holy names, chant, and that's his special kindness in the age of Kali. Haribol. Sure. Microphone's just now coming.
In relation to the first question that
Sure.
I'm just thinking that when it says without consideration of time and circumstances, it refers to that the Mahamantra should be, how to say, propagated without any strict rules.
Yep.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
There is a verse, I don't know if it's Caritamrita or Bhagavatam, that says that there is no
Hard and fast rules.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's
True.
my understanding. And
Yeah.
then, of course, we have to. So the Mahamantra should be there for everyone and at any time. And then, yes, when you preach, you should consider, even the Bhagavad says that there are, I think, 5 factors for the success of every action.
Yes.
And yeah, there is time, there is the patient, there is the person, etc. So that's not only time.
Very nice comment. Yeah, thank you. All right, we've got it.
Last Sunday.
Sure.
Last Sunday's verse sort of covered this topic. And it's whether people want it, don't want it, or fit or unfit. So that could sort of cover the situation.
Yeah, I can read that if you like. I think this is the one you're referring to. Not considering who asked for it and who did not, nor who was fit and who was unfit to receive it, Caitanya Mahaprabhu distributed the fruit of devotional service.
Covers all situations.
It does. Jai Sri Caitanya Caritamrita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.